Hi, welcome to Chili's. That was a very hard maneuver because little do you know, I have hardly any floor space to roll on. I am a trash monster. Hi everyone! I've mentioned this in all my recent wrap-ups, but I have forfeited the monthly wrap-up. I think it was a little bit too constricting to my reading tastes, and I kept feeling this pressure to read so much before the month was done, and that was just stupid, so gotta put that on mute. Now I've just begun doing wrap-ups when I feel like it, and today I feel like it. So I am in my sophomore year of college, and it's the fall semester. I'm suffering. I have so much to do. I barely read anymore. Like, the 2 books I read this month were for school. I've read 15 books since the last time we talked in the beginning of October, but a lot of those were for school. I'll just get into it. The first book that I finished, which came out September, I believe? It's been a while. It's been a hot minute. Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas! I didn't like it. I was intending on doing a Snapchat review of this, but that never went through because I forgot to save, like, the footage didn't save. Long story short, I have a lot of negative feelings about this, and I feel like it's past too long for me to post that snippet of review footage that I do have. I was not a fan. I think the romance got a little heavy in this one. The series is still white AF. It was just boring. Throne of Glass went downhill. She tumbled. Yeah, I gave that book 3 stars. Honestly, it's like a 2.5 star, but it just, the more it goes on, the more I wish it wouldn't. And I have a video coming soon talking about Sarah J Maas and problematic aspects of her series, so keep an eye out for that. I'm gonna do some slam dunking soon. Speaking of slam dunking, the next book I read was Confess by Colleen Hoover. I read this book because I notoriously love to make fun of Colleen Hoover. I have never read a book by her that I enjoyed, and these books are just ridiculously fast and ridiculously stupid. So whenever I feel like a good laugh, I pick one of them up, rant on Snapchat. Again, I have Snapchats for that I could post as a review, but I never did. This is just full of tropes, full of stupid guy dominance things. I gave that book 2 stars. It's infuriating and bad, but it wasn't like the worst thing I've read from her. I don't know, I just realized recently that I need to stop giving her my money for her books though, so for the rest of time I'm gonna be picking up her books from the library if I feel like torturing myself. The third book that I read was Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. I listened to this on audiobook, which is on YouTube. I should not be using my 40,000 person platform to talk about getting illegal audiobooks from YouTube. This is the 3rd book in the Daughter Smoke and Bone trilogy that's by Laini Taylor. I'm not even kidding you, this is probably like a 600-page book in the tall hardback. It took me probably a solid month of knitting and listening to the audiobook on 2 times speed to finish it. It was so long, and although I adore the first book and I think it was really great and I love the type of world it is, it's just not good. If you don't know, Daughter of Smoke and Bone is about a girl who lives in a world where there are like monsters, and she helps as an apprentice to one of these people, and she discovers that angels exist, so it's like angels versus demons, and it's set in Prague, so it's super cool. The villains in this book are super interesting, the backstory in this book is super interesting, and I highly recommend it. However, this 3rd one was just drawn out so long. It was kind of unnecessary. It focused on people I didn't care about. So if this was a more concise ending, I'm sure I would have liked it better, but I gave the ending 3 stars. The next book I read was for class, and it was called Guyland by Michael Kimmel. This is a book that focuses on masculinity, specifically white college guys aged 16 to 26. And it was interesting, just not the coolest thing I've ever read. Again, it was for class, so a lot of the time I was just focusing on what can I use for an essay, and the other half I was just kind of rolling my eyes and being frustrated because some of the guys in this book were just infuriating and people that I would never want to run into in my life unless I was running into them with a car. So yeah, this was an interesting read, but I feel like I'd rather focus on reading about feminism rather than reading about masculinity, so it wasn't the most enjoyable for me, so I gave that one 3 stars. The next book I read was also for class, and this is for my English class. It was called The In-Between World of Vikram Lal, and this is by MJ Vizanji. This is a book that's set in Kenya, and it follows an Indian family, and it's pretty much what the title suggests. He's not a white person, he's not a black person, so he doesn't know where he fits in within the society, and this follows his life spanning from kid to adult, and it gets very political at the end. I think it has really good symbolism in it, and I do like the issues it brings up about race and the Indian culture in Kenya at that time. However, wasn't the most interesting to me. Like I said, it got really political and it was confusing at the end. This is pretty dense, and we were reading it toward the end of the semester where I was sinking horribly. So it was just difficult to get through, so I gave that book 3 stars. So the next book that I read, I also listened to on audiobook. I was so busy. This is pretty much the only thing I could muster this month. It was The Rose Society by Marie Lu, the second book in the Young Elites trilogy. This series follows a girl named Adelina who, after a plague spreads around her city, is affected with powers, and hers is a very dark power that often threatens to consume her. And this series kind of follows how she has to battle this tormenting power in her life and use it for good, but that becomes increasingly harder for her, so this series just documents the struggle she has to go through, the people she interacts with, and I think the second book was pretty good. I really enjoyed the first book, but I think by the time that I got around to the second one, it was a little bit past its prime. If I would have read it sooner to when I read the first book, I probably would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I like the new characters that are added into this. I love the darkness of the series and the inner conflict occurring in Adelina. Specifically, the audiobooks are incredible. The narrator is probably the best narrator, like the most soothing and perfect voice. They are amazing. And I say they because I also listened to the third one, but I'll talk about that one later. This one was really cool and interesting, not as good as the first one, but I did give it 4 stars and it was enjoyable. The next book I read, I didn't mean to read, but I ended up reading it in like 2 sittings after I got it in a book unboxing. It was The End or Something Like That by Anne D. Ellis. This book follows a girl whose best friend dies, and it's all about how they had talked about getting her to come back in the afterlife and getting to communicate with her in the afterlife. And so it was just this documentation of this girl not knowing what's real and what's not and trying to contact her dead best friend. It's told in like this very choppy, fun format for dark matter that it is. I just thought it was so bizarre and so interesting. It's definitely one of those books that's not supposed to be based in reality. It was just a fun read. It was fun but dark. So if you're into that, I think you'd really like it. It was just something that was easy and fun. I gave it 3 stars and it was very, very quick and enjoyable. The next book I read was George by Alex Gino. Alex Gino, the author, identifies as genderqueer, so it's an own voices book. I'm re-recording this part because I realized I was using the wrong pronouns the entire time I was talking about George, which is completely my fault because I was going too fast and forgot the book I had read. But George by Alex Gino is about a transgender girl who is in elementary school, and she's just trying to navigate her life with these feelings, wanting to tell people that she's a girl and wanting to come out and identify as a transgender girl. But there's a lot of fear and societal pressure that goes along with that, so it's a very inner struggle for her. This is the first book I read about a transgender person. I think it was very interesting because it was a middle grade book, which it just makes me think I really wish I had read this when I was a kid because I would have learned so much. I would have learned about transgender people so much earlier in my life and I could get that discussion going. I think this is a very important book for kids. I think it was well written and well done, and it was just very important to get a glimpse into the mind of someone that's experiencing wanting to transition. So I think it was a brave story to tell. I'm really glad that it's out in the world, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you have like younger people in your life that you think might need to learn about this. It's a very good and very important read. So I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it, and I think it has a great message. This next book I read for class, and it was Rabbitproof Fence by Doris Pilkington. This is also for my English class. It's an Australian read, and it follows the lives of these 3 girls. They were captured to be sent to a camp for all the girls who were half native and half white, and so it's documents these 3 girls who had escaped from that to go back to their homeland, and it followed their journey like all the way up through the Australian barren desert. And this is actually written by one of the women's granddaughters, so Doris is actually someone that knows the people that this went on with. I think it's a great story. It's a really interesting narrative, and it's definitely a powerful story of like girl power, and as you can tell from that synopsis, it was just very heart-wrenching. There's 2 parts of it that I wasn't so keen on. The first was I feel like a lot of this book was was written based on like assumptions and like speculation, so just having to suspend my disbelief in order to read it. Like the amount of detail that's put into it, like from the parts that aren't written from the three girls' perspectives, it was just difficult to comprehend because I felt like half the book I was just thinking, but were you there? Like, do you know that? It's just hard. And then the other part of it that I wasn't so keen on was that the beginning and the end don't really focus on the girls, and it starts to get really convoluted, and it talks about the justice system and the police and the backstory of the natives, which is crucial to the story pretty much, but a little bit dry for me. So I ended up only giving this book 2 stars. I feel like if I were Australian, it would impact me a lot more, but not knowing a lot about Aborigines, it just didn't strike me as much as it probably could have. It was an important read. I couldn't see myself there because I've never been to Australia. I don't know a lot about Aborigine culture, so it was just hard to put myself in the shoes of those people or understand fully what the travel must have been like. Perhaps if I read more literature about Australia and Aborigines, then I can return to this and see if I feel differently about it, but I bought this copy from thrift books, so that's definitely going to be on my shelf. Like I mentioned earlier, the next book I read was The Midnight Star by Marilu, the 3rd book in the Young Elites trilogy. I feel like this was a strong ending. I liked it, but I will admit there's a pretty bad user error in reading this book or listening to this book. I was distracted for a lot of it, and for a lot of it I just wasn't invested in it, and I don't know if that's because I lost interest in it or just because I was feeling stressed at the time and didn't put a lot of effort into understanding the audiobook, but it got a little bit hard to understand, and I was skipping parts of it and then having to remember what happened, and the way I listened to the audiobook I kept losing my place. So it was just a very difficult and very scattered reading experience. I did like how it ended up. I'm not angry about the ending. I do think it was cool. I can't even gather things to say about it. Like, it was so vanilla to me. So I don't know. I gave it 3 stars. Maybe if I read the physical copy it would have impacted me more, but it wasn't a mind-blowing ending or anything, and I just kind of went with it, you know? So next I read Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. I already have a review up for this, and I'm technically not really allowed to talk about it before it comes out, so I'm gonna keep this very brief, but I gave this book 4 stars. However, I feel like we gotta talk about something, and I don't know if I'm gonna get in trouble for this, but we gotta sit down and have a one-on-onesie. There was a tweet that arose to attention over the past week talking about how the people of color in Carve the Mark are portrayed as the aggressive antagonists. This is something that I have since talked about on Twitter, but I haven't said anything on YouTube, so I feel like this needs to be addressed. My reaction to it is to apologize because I haven't been conditioned to be looking for these types of things in books, so I didn't detect the subtle racism that was there. I totally agree that it is not helpful to stereotypes, and it's not helpful to the perception of people of color to always be depicting them as the people who murder other people's families and are always aggressive, and I think that's, now that I realize it and now that I see that and I've seen all the threads about it and the tweets and the people of color reviewing this book, I'm ashamed that I didn't notice it because I realize now I've probably read so many books about that and it didn't even faze me because I wasn't looking for it, but now I see it and now I realize it's a problem and now I need to learn how to call it out better. So I wanted to apologize for my negligence in addressing it in my review or picking up on it earlier, but now I realize and I recognize and understand that there are bits of this book that might not rest well with marginalized communities, so go into it being aware of that, and I promise I'm gonna have discussions later up on YouTube about why BookTube needs more diversity in order to recognize these things, because if all the reviewers who reviewed it weren't all the big white YouTubers, then perhaps someone could have recognized this earlier, just because we don't have very much diversity at the top end of YouTube. That's like an iceberg topic that I should probably get into in a different video, but that was a little sneak peek. Back to my wrap up. The next book I read, I'm currently writing an essay about. I don't know. Oh, there it is. You don't want to see how dirty my room is right now, but I managed to find it. This is Missoula by John Krakauer. It is a nonfiction book about the rapes that have occurred in Missoula, Montana, which is a college town. This talks about a handful of girls that have experienced rape cases in that town while they were in college, and it discusses the justice system and how many of those rapes did not get dealt with properly, and even the rapes that were prosecuted, they weren't prosecuted in the law, they were prosecuted at campus courts. And it just discusses how rapists so easily get off the hook and the culture of protection that goes into that. This is an infuriating read, but it's very informative. I probably would not have picked this up if I hadn't read it for class, just because it's written by a male and it's about a topic as sensitive as rape. But I do think that John handled it well, and he was very informative. He kept it very focused on the interviews he did with the women, and I think it was really great that he was able to portray their opinions and their feelings, pinpointing how hard it was for them to have to deal with these things. And it was tragic and infuriating and just dark, but I definitely learned stuff going into this. It gets very deep. I felt this tackled the issues well. It got a little bit dry toward the middle, but I feel like that's kind of needed if it's gonna talk about the corruption of the justice system. It probably should talk about what the justice system does in the first place. I wish that there was a stronger message about reporting rape, because a lot of this talks about like how rape is so underreported and how all these things add up to make it so that women don't report. And I feel like at the end of a book that's so discouraging about rape in the justice system, I feel like there should have been some sort of push to be like, even though you just read this, do it anyway. I'm just gonna move on from that one. I gave it 3 stars. It was informative, but again, it was for class, so I kind of dragged myself down looking for quotes. The next book I read was a DNF, but I read the entire thing except for like 50 pages, so I just considered it read and I rated it and everything. And this was Where Futures End by Parker Peavyhouse. This is a book that is 5 short stories slash sections that all deal with the same topic, and then they float into one another. Basically, one of the stories is like 5 years from now, one of the stories is 50 years from now, one of the stories is 100 years from now, so it just keeps getting more into the future. And because of that, it was very sci-fi, which I wasn't expecting and I didn't like, and that's why I ended up putting it down, just because I lost interest in it once I realized the genre I was dealing with. I listened to this on audiobook. I was bored. It was not interesting. I knew that if I finished it, I still would have given it the same rating of 2 stars, so I just decided not to finish it and not waste my time. If you like sci-fi, you'd probably enjoyed this more than me, but it's not what I was expecting, so I just ended up not giving it a great rating at all. I can see how some people might have enjoyed it more. It just wasn't for me. The next book I read was also for class, but I dropped the book behind my bed, and that would be quite an acrobatic adventure to try and get it back, so I can't hold it up for you. I'll just insert a picture. It was True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey. This is another book set in Australia, and if you're from Australia, you've probably heard the name Ned Kelly, but I was just told about it. Yay, Western culture! Yeah, so apparently Ned Kelly is like this super famous guy in Australia. I wouldn't know. I still don't understand very much. But this book is written as if it's a found document about his life, and therefore it doesn't have any commas or grammar, which I guess kind of gives to the authenticity of the story, because it's a person who's basically an outlaw. I don't know, I just wasn't a fan of the writing style. I wasn't a fan of the story. It was really dense. This is the only book in that English class out of like 15 things we've read that I did not finish. I skimmed the end of it just because it was so dense and I had no time to read it. I gave this book 2 stars. It kind of goes back to what I said about Rabbitproof Fence. If I was Australian, if I understood Ned Kelly more, it might have been cooler. I couldn't bring myself to care. Like, I needed to know more about him, so I was lost, but then the grammar was really hard to understand, and the way the story was told. 2 stars. The last book I read I got from the library here, and that was The Marvels by Brian Selznick. This is a book that's told half in drawings, and then the other half is written in prose. It follows a family tree called The Marvels. The narration of it was set in 1990s London, and it talks about this boy meeting one of his estranged uncles and how his life intertwines with the story of the Marvels. I thought it was very intriguing. It was very twisty, and there were lots of cool aspects about it. It has a little LGBTQ enveloped into it. I just think it was a really interesting and cool way to tell a story. I don't know if you saw my Snapchat, but it made me cry. Brian Selznick knows what he's doing. He's such a perfect storyteller. Everything I read by him, I'm just astounded. It's always so great. So if you've never read anything by Brian Selznick, I thought this book was beautiful. It's hecka expensive. It's like $35, so get it from the library, but I do think it is so good. I gave the book 4 stars just because it was great, but it's not like the best. It's awesome. I highly recommend it, but now that this video is like 30 minutes long, we are finished. Also, all of the sunlight is gone, so now I'm just relying on my makeup mirror and my desk lamp as lighting. Again, most of these books I read for class, so I didn't get the best reading experience out of them, but let me know if you've read any of these books I talked about. Let me know if you have recommendations like any of the ones that I liked. I will see you next time with another video. Goodbye!